Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, once again. I think you can already move to the next slide, Dietert. Today, I will guide you through the process that led us, eu.bac, to create the eu.bac EPBD BACS compliance verification package that will be further detailed by my colleagues in the next presentations. Some of the information that I'm giving you in these slides were already anticipated by Dietert, but the starting point of the process is actually the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. The last review of this EPBD was presented in 2016 by the European Commission as part of the Clean Energy Package. When we take a look at the most relevant amendments, and now you see on the screen 3 of the bullet points taken directly from the press release of the European Commission, we see that the encouragement of the use of ICT and smart technologies was really at the core of this review. There are a number of amendments on building automation and control systems in there, and this is what we believe the core of this EPBD review. Actually, these amendments contribute largely to the other pillar of this review, which is the decarbonization of the building stock by 2050. So in this EPBD review, there were also introduced the long-term renovation strategies. Another element that will be further detailed later on is the smart readiness indicator, which is also a very important tool and which also proves this important focus on building automation and control systems. As Dietert said, the directive entered into force on the 9th of July 2018, and the deadline for member states to transpose the text into national legislations expired 6 months ago on the 10th of March 2020. You can move to the next slide, Dietert, thanks. As eu.bac, association representing the industry, we've been always involved in the process. We've been providing inputs and suggestions to policymakers and stakeholders before the EPBD was proposed, during the EPBD was negotiated at all levels, to the Council, to the Commission, to the Parliament, and so on. But when the EPBD was approved, we decided as a European association not to stop there, but rather to try to get to the member states, to help policymakers and stakeholders, even at the national level, in order to turn words into action. So the first thing that we did is we asked Wade Strategic Efficiency, which is the consultancy that worked at the impact assessment of the European Commission on the EPBD, to look into 3 different scenarios, basically depending on the ambition, on the different degree of ambition deployed by member states at national level. And we see that when these BACS amendments are implemented properly, the impact is quite huge, because the savings can correspond to up to 14% of total building primary energy consumption. And this is the impact only of the amendments on building automation and control solution. 64 MT CO2 annual savings in 2030, and 450 annual terawatt per hour annual final energy savings. So this is huge, but also if you take a look at the perspective of the owner, for example, in terms of energy bill savings that are triggered, or the value of energy savings that exceeds the value of investment by a factor of 9. This study is available on the eu.bac website, and there are a lot of other interesting figures in there. But basically, with these figures, you see that there is quite a huge potential. But we said it before, there are 3 different scenarios, and it depends really on how these BACS amendments are transposed at national level. This transposition could lead to this number, but could also lead to quite lower numbers. And you can move to the next slide, Dietert, thank you. Because in order to show the member states how they could reach these numbers, we also developed another tool. And this tool is called the eu.bac guidelines, which is also available on our website. In the guidelines, we give suggestions at all levels to the member states on how to transpose these BACS amendments. And not only the BACS amendments, it's a document of 60 pages. So there are quite a number of suggestions coming from the industry. On the right-hand side, you see the text of Article 14.15, paragraph 4, which is what will be further discussed today. It's the core of the EPBD BACS compliance verification package. When a directive is being discussed at European level, but even when it is approved, the wording in some parts is always quite vague, open, broad, flexible. And the reason is that there is the principle of subsidiarity. So member states have the possibility to decide themselves on some principles. But obviously, I would like to give you two examples on how the transposition can make a difference. So these requirements are introduced by a sentence that says, member states shall lay down requirements where technically and economically feasible. So this is the text at European level. But when this is transposed at national level, these where technically and economically feasible cannot be simply translated into the national languages, but there should be a parameter there. We suggest in our guidance to have a parameter, and the European Commission suggests to have a parameter there as well. And not only, the parameter should be clearly identified, framed, and justified. Why? Because if there's no parameter there, the implementation of this article, of this requirement, will be completely left to the interpretation, potentially, completely left to the interpretation of the single assessor, will be completely left to the interpretation of the single users, of the single situation. We saw this in the past, and this is why we gave this suggestion. Obviously, we have also an overview, and we see that very rapidly that France, for example, translated this indicating a payback time. So they say that the installation of a BACS is always feasible if the payback time is not more than 6 years, which is, we believe, a very good example of how this can achieve the desired expectations in terms of savings. Because it's clear, because it's identified and framed. But also, if you look at the text below, the building automation control system should be capable of, and there are certain capabilities there. These capabilities are defined with words today. So there is no further reference. And when we see the needs of the designers, specifiers of different user groups, clearly this must be defined better. This must be anchored to a certain parameter. And in our guidelines, we say that the standard EN 15232 should be indicated when this is transposed at national level. And we also refer to class B of EN 15232 as the minimum level in order to achieve these functionalities. Nevertheless, we saw that even with this guidance, even if this was appreciated by member states, we were still receiving some questions. And I included two questions in the slide. So how to identify compliance with BACS requirements, and if manufacturers were supplying information on BACS compliance according to EN 15232. Thank you, Didert. You can move ahead. So these questions, we needed to address them because these were questions that we were receiving from policymakers, from consultants active in the EPBD transposition at national level. So we actually worked at another document. We wanted to develop a tool that could ensure compliance check with the requirements in the easiest and most effective way. So we created a dedicated task force with industry experts. We had internal workshop from June to October 2020, plus external consultation with consultants, policymakers, and peers. In all these workshops, we looked at the different possibilities in order to understand what was the best tool and how to develop that. On the 2nd of November, finally, we were able to publish the eu.bac compliance verification package, which is composed by checklist, self-declaration, introductory notes, and press release. My colleague Bonnie will further give you details about all these documents. In this month that separates us from the 2nd of November, we started communicating this because obviously this tool is effective as much as it is further disseminated and communicated and implemented at national level. So we communicated this to member states. We had several meetings with policy officers in the ministries that are in charge of the EPBD transposition, so in Ireland, Latvia, Sweden, Lithuania, and so on. We met with the European Commission, with DG Energy, and we met with the study team of an important study that will further look into the technical building systems under the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. As the last piece of information I would like to give you right now is that these compliance verification package that we'll be discussing today, it's complementary to the eu.bac guidelines and to the other documents I shortly announced today. So basically, this must be always read in conjunction. This checklist is adding details to the guidelines. So I always suggest you to take a look also at our eu.bac guidelines, because this package of tools is what is, we believe, needed in order to fully understand the perspective that we're giving and the suggestion we're giving in order to achieve these potential benefits. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Bonnie Brooke, who is our next speaker, who is chair of the eu.bac EPBD BACS Compliance Verification Task Force. Bonnie, I am really looking forward to your overview of this compliance verification package. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dieter. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that so many people, all of you, have chosen to spend this time with us and learn about this compliance verification package. So, Dieter, could you please advance? Thank you. You have already seen this text in one of the slides from the previous speaker. However, here we have other words highlighted, and this is to attract your attention to the focus of the detail that is going to be introduced to you in the next 20 minutes, let's say. So it is about non-residential buildings. It is about buildings with over 290 kilowatts capacity for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And most of all, it is about the capabilities that you see on the right-hand side. So is the building automation control system capable of monitoring, analyzing, adjusting, benchmarking, detecting, informing, allowing communication, being interoperable? These have been the words that we in the task force translated into some specific questions that an assessor should be able to check. So I would like to just go to the next slide, Dieter, in order to visualize the scope of these capabilities. So the capabilities, and we call them A, B, and C for short, they apply to a heating system, a combination of heating and ventilation, or, so the first is Article 14. Article 15 addresses the air conditioning system, or a combination of air conditioning and ventilation. And in the directive, we have definitions of these systems. So here we're talking about thermal output of 290 kilowatts or above of the system that actually provides generates and provides calorific output. So we're not talking about electricity, we're talking thermal energy for the heating system. And when we say heating system, that includes generation, distribution, and emission, or for the other ones that I have already listed. So this was something that was very important as basis. And we have also taken a few other definitions word for word, because here we're talking about compliance. And when we talk about compliance, the text has to be very clear, very specific, and very detailed. So could you please advance to the next slide, Dieter? Yes. This is actually my last slide, and then I will show you the documents themselves. Before that, just a few words. How did we start? I already mentioned we were looking at definition of specific questions that would prove that the system possesses these capabilities listed in the directive. So it wasn't just the questions, of course, it was also how do I prove that my system really has these capabilities? So we needed questions and we needed pieces of evidence. And that was our starting point. So after having this main concept, our attention was then directed into the users. So the inspectors, the building inspectors, the assessors of the capability of the system. And in order to confirm that we are doing and specifying the detail adequately, we then collected information about the typical compliance verification process and the typical users, so the user profile. What we found out, what we established, was that the inspector, the building inspector, the market surveillance authority that actually confirms the compliance, and this is the first group that you see here, the building inspectors in the target users, that these inspectors would have maximum 2 hours for this inspection. So first very important point, maximum 2 hours. The second important point was the building inspector might not be an expert in building automation controls. That was also important. And the third one was that just simply showing on a graphical user interface of the system proof that this capability is there could not be used as a supporting record, could not be used as evidence. So we needed to have something that you could basically file in a folder, in a way. So these three facts were very, very important for us in order to define the detail of the check. So you can see in the center of the screen right now is the verification checklist, and that is what is the meat. That's what we wanted to create. However, given this information about the inspections, a typical inspection, we decided that there has to be a preparation phase. And that's why at the bottom of the screen, there is another document, which is called self-declaration. And this self-declaration is actually the responsibility of the building owner as the person that has the ultimate responsibility about the building and about the compliance in this building. And the content of this self-declaration is exactly the same questions, same supporting records. However, this, of course, will save a lot of time to the building inspector when he just comes and checks the compliance at the end. And I will lead you through the process just in a moment. And then the third document to the left, these are introductory notes that accompany the checklist, and they complete the package because they list the important definitions. They also describe the structure of the checklist and the main references. So actually, if one has these introductory notes in combination with the checklist, they don't need me to introduce this to them. That's why we call them introductory notes, to make it very clear and very simple. So now, thank you, Dieter. I will, thank you. So I hope I have the screen, and I will lead you through the process. So I believe you can see my screen now, and this is the first document in the chronological order, let's put it this way. This is the preparation phase. This is the self-declaration that the building owner should prepare in advance. So whether it's the building owner themselves or it's someone, technical experts that will do this, will be appointed by the building owner, this is of course the same. However, the important thing is that the building owner signs this self-declaration, and if there is an appointed expert, the expert should also sign this self-declaration. And what this checklist, because this is a checklist as well, starts with is this information section that refers to the famous 290 kilowatts. So, of course, there will be probably not many buildings that will have exactly 290 kilowatts. And it is important to know what is really the effective rated output. So you could see in the first column, we have the questions. These are the specific, detailed questions that need to be answered by the assessor. And then we have the response in the second column. The third column is where we actually describe what type of supporting records are expected. About the next column, I will talk a bit later. And what you can see in the last column is actually what a building inspector would be checking when he or she visits the building. So given that the self-declaration has been completed, signed, and supported by the required documents, what is left for the building inspector to do in this maximum 2 hours would be to check the self-declaration is there, all questions are answered, records are there, and then spot check. Spot check either the records themselves or spot check like here, let's say on the equipment nameplates, some information. So we suggest a few checks to be done by the building inspector for each one of these questions, but this is just a suggestion here. Now, what is important is the answer to this question and the supporting record. I think I spent sufficient time just to explain the structure right now. It is very simple. This information section addresses just the heating system, then the air conditioning system, and as you can see, we even added notes here in order to make it even more clear. Then there is one final question in this section, and it is related to the rooms, to the room automation, the availability of that. So this question is really to identify what are the representative types of rooms in this building. Because we have different buildings, and as shown here, the example, if we are in an office building, typical room types are individual office or open office zone or a meeting room. And then this is basically what should be put here together with the area of these rooms, and the floor plans with the marked rooms should be also presented. Then we come to the second step, and the second step is related to the coverage of the building automation and controls in this building. And here we start with the questions yes and no. So all questions in the checklist are actually either yes or no, because this is not a rating system that says, oh, I'm 60% compliant. You're either compliant or you're not compliant. So if you're compliant, the question should be answered with yes. Going back to the coverage. The question here is the heating system, or at least 80% of this system, controlled by the building automation? And this, of course, includes everything as I showed you before on the schematic, so generation, distribution, and consumption. That's why it relates to the list in the previous section, which was in the supporting records, this one here. And when you have this list and you have the number of kilowatts, the total number, then you know how much do you control really in the building. Because if you don't have sufficient coverage with automation and controls, then all these very useful capabilities, very good capabilities that are listed in the directive will not be effective. The capabilities of the system might be there, but if they're not applied to sufficient range of equipment in this building that you actually can control all this, then it won't be effective. So in the starting section, it's also very simple. 80% in heating, air conditioning, ventilation, and then 80% in room automation. And the supporting records are also here listed as before. Now, perhaps it is time to introduce these boundary conditions or prerequisites for the BACS capabilities. I have already explained it actually in words, but just to really position it in the structure of the checklist. This information that you see in this column is for help, as an aid in the checklist. This is a recommendation. This is good practice. This is industry good practice. And it provides useful information that would help you understand why actually this question is answered. And you see it a bit further, it is would be even more useful, especially in the energy management of the building. So as the next step, we come to the real capabilities as listed in the directive. You can see here capability A, that relates to the continuous monitoring, logging, analyzing, and allowing for adjusting energy usage. This capability is checked with 5 questions, A1 to A5. And then we come to the next capability related to the benchmarking, detecting losses, and informing the responsible person. And this section has B1 to B7 checks. Yep. And then we have the last one on allowing communication and being interoperable. And here we have 3 questions, 3 checks to be done. So I will go back to just show you, let's take A1 as an example. And then if we have time, we go through more, or I will basically also react to any questions from you and show you the specific section that responds to your question with clarification, of course, but just so you see how it works. So imagine you're the expert that has to assess whether the capability is there for the capability A, and you start going A1 to A5 checks, and A1 is the building energy meter data integrated and analyzed in BACS, Building Automation Control System, with at least hourly data granularity to identify energy optimization opportunities in the building. And next, you have reference to the EN 15232 Class B. Class B was already mentioned by Simone, and the specific function in the standard. The standard is mentioned where relevant in a question. So you can see this further in the list, further down in the list as well. Now, the trending functions and consumption determination are referred to the Class B in the standard. And what should be included? This comes from the task force. You need at building level the thermal energy for space heating, the thermal energy for space cooling, and the electrical energy in the building. And this is the minimum. So this is by no means exhaustive. As you can see, there is not even mentioning of submetering in some way, or partly, let's say. So this is considered as the minimum, and then what the supporting evidence should be is a PDF, and we put PDF, but it's, yeah, it's some sort of a report in whichever format for the building electricity, heating and cooling consumption that compares energy values over different time periods. And here you have an example. For example, cumulated daily values from last month before the inspection compared to the daily values for the same month from last year. This is just an example. It could be something similar, but this is to make it very clear and simple, and to really remove any room for or range for wide interpretation. And then what we have as a prerequisite is, of course, that you should be metering sufficiently in the building. And again, you see this 80% here. And then also you should make sure as a building owner or operator that your meters are certified. You should make sure that the readings are actually validated and accurate. And then monitoring and logging are prerequisites for analyzing capability. And this sentence is there because in order to fulfill the capability A that you see here, you should retain historical analysis, the data for historical analysis, so trends can be observed. As mentioned, this text in the boundary conditions or prerequisites is just to be helpful, to be useful, to provide some advice, some recommendation. This is not something that is going to be checked or is considered part of the compliance to the capabilities of BACS, because the capability is checked here in the question and supported by the record. If the meters are giving erroneous data, then yeah, that means the report is not going to be very useful. And this is really the example that I wanted to give you. The last column is here for the building owner and the expert to know what to expect when the inspection comes. Now, if we go to the actual compliance verification checklist, which was where we started basically, you see that the look is a bit different, the layout is a bit different. However, the content of the questions and everything else is one-to-one to what you see in the self-declaration. So here, if you imagine you're the building inspector, all that you need to do is you come to the building, you see the self-declaration is there, it is signed, all questions are answered with yes, I have all the supporting records. Okay, so do I check now which equipment do I check? This is really up to the inspector in this case, but I think it's specific enough. It is a main piece of equipment of the heating system in the main plant, or if it's a very old building and you don't have these nameplates or you don't have access to them, then check the operation and maintenance manual. So, and then enter the response and that would be it, basically. Same applies to everything else. The spot checks. You can do some spot checks in the plant room here. You can check the availability of the report. Is the report there? You don't have to go and check all the values. Simply, is the report there? Do they compare previous and current periods or something like this? Just to basically check common sense the reports that are provided. And all these checks should be, of course, completed within these 2 hours that we took as our starting point. And then the last piece in this package is this introductory notes. And as I already described, as I mentioned to you, there are definitions, there is some interpretation, there are the target users, and perhaps here I should say it is not just the building inspector or the building owner that this package should be useful to. It is also the building designer, because when we have new buildings or renovation projects, or when a building designer consults the building owner, they need to also be aware of these capabilities and provide the best advice. So they could really refer to this package, and this will help in this direction. Then we have the policymakers, of course, as well, because this will also help in the transposition of the directive, but also in the implementation. And then we have the checklist structure, the schematic that you saw before. As I mentioned, everything that I showed you and emphasized on is actually in this document. You also have sources and references.
I will also have a look at the next steps that will follow after this compliance checking of BACS in the non-residential stock that is targeted. I think I still have a delay, so I'll just wait for you to see the next slide. So just very briefly, myself, I'm a building services engineer. However, I've worked as a designer, installer, contractor, but also as a researcher. As you can see, I'm still doing a PhD. I was crazy enough to decide to do that. And I'm happy to be working for RIVA as a project consultant, but I've also worked as a lobbyist. So you could look at me as a generalist. I'm not specialized in anything particular, although I am very passionate about building automation control systems, and I'm a geek. I have a bunch of smart building technology at home, and I also installed in a few projects. But connect with me on LinkedIn so that I can also be in touch with what you are doing, and I'm sure we can explore synergies. Then a few words about RIVA. RIVA is the Federation of HVAC Associations. That's historically, however, most of our members, they cover all building services, so all technical building systems, as they are referred to in the Energy Performance of Building Directive. And as a disclaimer, you will see a lot of images in my presentation, not so much text, and all of these images have links behind them. So afterwards, you can go in further depth. As a generalist, as I've told you, I will be rather horizontal and not go in all the verticals, but I provide you the necessary links to do that yourselves afterwards. I would just point out from this slide that at RIVA, we put people first, and we want buildings to actually work in practice. That's something very important for us, and we are doing our best to educate the building professionals to be able to deploy this. And of course, we want to be in contact as closely as possible with building technology manufacturers in general to manage this exchange. During the COVID-19 pandemic, our experts have been very active. Here you have just a few examples, and as I said, behind all of these images, you have links, and I will not say more than that for this. And now to get specifically to my presentation, I will start with the what, because the why is very clear for building automation control systems. So the EPBD implementation and the compliance verification. Then I'll look a bit at the how. So is there technical knowledge available to support this verification even more than what eu.bac has just presented? And how to do this, how to deploy this, because there are a lot of buildings across Europe, and how will we be able to have enough inspectors to cover all of them and as fast as possible? And then the last 3 points are rather looking at the next steps. So the prerequisite part of why compliance BACS are needed. EPBD implementation, as you all know, this is the only caveat that it needs to be transposed at national level and then implemented. You need to ensure that it's surveilled throughout this process, and then of course there is the occasional review. And as we all know, now it was a bit fastened, so we will have an EPBD review already next year, which is always good to already embed the lessons learned. But this is the process, and that's why coordination is very important when it comes to the Energy Performance of Building Directive, to be sure that in practice is what it should be when it was decided on at European level. For the compliance verification, these are just a few adjectives that I would like to share when it comes to this package. That it needs to ensure coherence, it needs to be supportive of a coordinated approach and possibly harmonized. And I always look at traffic lights and signs that it's so easy to understand them wherever you are in Europe or even worldwide. And I know that building automation control systems are much more complex, and building performance in general is much more complex than just traffic lights. But still, I think we can aim to have this harmonization in the next steps, because ultimately building performance as such is, and building physics is generally the same globally. Then, of course, it needs to be unambiguous and correct to be sure that you're doing the right thing. And you need an easy-to-use tool for that. And I would say that what eu.bac has prepared and presented in the previous two presentations has all these points checked. So we are happy to see this from Riva side, and we would like to continue the discussion because, and now I'm entering the how part. From the policy side, there is already technical support, so technical documents. We have, thanks to the Energy Performance of Building Directive, we have the Energy Performance of Building Standards, and they provide a holistic, level playing field and flexible way of assessing and also certifying building performance. And they have also a modular structure, so you can see there is a module for building automation and control, and there are quite a few standards and technical reports about building automation control systems, and this could provide additional support, so extending the knowledge base to what Simone and Pani already shared. And we have a collaboration. It's already, I think, 3 years since it came out. There is a Riva guidebook on building automation control systems that was aiming at that moment to make building automation control systems unambiguous and to have a one-stop guide that can help you understand also terminology, also functionalities, and so on. And we already have a few webinars organized within the BACS Academy in the past years on this, so I warmly invite you to follow them if you haven't done already. And as I said, there are links behind all of these images. So for sure, we have a knowledge base that could be used to deploy this verification process. But when it comes to the process itself, you need skilled inspectors to be sure that they actually understand what they are doing. And I will just illustrate with 2 EU-funded projects, Horizon 2020 projects. One is ProfTrack, and the aim was to create a qualification scheme for the definition and mapping of skills needed for NZEB, construction and renovation. And this is just an example, and it just shows that even now, I wasn't myself involved personally in this project at that moment of implementation. It has ended for a few years now. It's still alive as a repository for knowledge. But even myself, I would have some comments on these skills on the list. So this just shows that we need to do this right and in a coordinated way at EU level, because a lot of things will happen now in the building sector, and we need to do it right from the very first attempt. Just a bit more about the professions that were looked at. Again, there's still room for improvement, but it already provides a good starting point to go further. And just an illustration about the mapping per profession and what should be the level of expertise on the different skills. So it's a radar that has around it all the skills that were listed in 2 slides ago. I will not say more than that. So this is an approach to have this way of doing. And another example is another EU-funded project, SENSE, SEN EPB Standards Certified Experts. And basically here, this is a way of deploying the set of EPB standards that I was previously mentioning. So just having the standards is not enough. So you need the standards, but then you need training to understand how to use the standards, how to implement them. And of course, hand in hand, you need some tools, some software to perform such calculations and assessment. And SENSE project already covered the standards that you see on the screen. It's roughly 1/3 of the full set of EPB standards. For now, building automation and control systems are not there, but we are looking forward to keep an open dialogue from Riva's and EPB Center side with eu.bac and see how we can progress in this. And we already had a couple of online, so fully online pilot training and certification courses. 2 of them were in English, the one that you see here on screen, and the whole process from A to Z is online. and behind it you have some master trainers, a central scheme operator, national operators when it comes to training, and national trainers. And there's always this master trainer training the national trainers, because in the construction sector, not only it is fragmented, but it's also, I would say, affected by a language gap in addition to the skills gap. So if you really want to be successful in deploying such EU-level initiatives, you really need to reach out to the building professionals, all of them, that also to those that do not speak English. And that's why in Sense project this was showcased, and it's quite effective. And using a learning management system to deploy this was quite user-friendly, and people were happy about it. Now, looking at the future, so quality management, I think we can all think about it in different ways. Another example from an EU project for which there is already a webinar, a recording of a webinar in the BACS Academy. I, again, warmly invite you to look at it. But it looks at the whole process from design to operation, and how there is a gap between what's on paper, let's say, and what's happening in practice. And that's why BACS, I see it as a prerequisite to ensure that these gaps can be closed. And here are just a few examples how to do this. You always need a target value. You need to be able to evaluate it with a measured value. And of course, that can create this loop for feedback, and you can continuously ensure that you either avoid the gap, you close the gap, or you just keep it closed forever, which should be the aim. And this is something very important at Riva for us, that buildings should actually perform as they were intended to perform. And BACS and smart technology in general provide the needed tool to make this happen in reality. And there is a European guidebook, a Riva guidebook on quality management for buildings, and it's looking at both technical monitoring and commissioning processes. And Quantum, again, is a project that closed. However, there is a follow-up that's taking the experts in an out of their comfort zone. They are entering the financing discussion, and they are looking how to transform this performance gap risk from technical risk to financial risk. And this project is ongoing as we speak. So again, links all behind these images for more information. Now, for Smart Readiness Indicator, I think we can organize a separate webinar of 1.5 hours easily on that topic alone. I have a pleasure together with Bonnie to co-chair the SRI Topical Group C. And we have a lot of things that we see also for the future. For now, the SRI is a checklist, and basically how I see it, this is not Riva's position, official position, it's how I interpret this based on my generalist expertise, let's call it. I actually see the requirements for which this compliance verification was prepared as the minimum energy efficiency requirement of eco-design. And the Smart Readiness Indicator, I see it as the energy labels. And I think they can really go hand in hand. And I know there is a BACS lot being studied at the moment. But still, when it comes to the EPBD, I think it's a very similar marriage, that you have some minimum requirements when it comes to building automation control systems. And of course, then the SRI can push it further by the market, help the market push it further, because the SRI has a larger scope than just the BACS capabilities that are explained in EN 15232 and also Bonnie and Simone touched upon. So that's the relation. As I said, maybe we can organize another webinar on this topic. Let's see. And to close, I will touch upon the renovation wave. No surprise there, I guess. And I want to highlight some elements that just show how deeply we are in this digital transformation path. And I took the example of energy performance certificates, and they seem to become an instrumental tool in the next steps, and specifically in the renovation wave, as they will be needed for introducing mandatory minimum energy performance standards. This terminology is from eco design and energy labeling. It's not the same as EPB standards. It's actually minimum energy performance requirements if you look at it technically. But then it will become a data tool. It would support the financing via this EU taxonomy, and also support all sorts of green loans and mortgages. And furthermore, it would be used to tackle energy poverty. And I specifically want to focus on the digital building logbook that will be soon introduced, which will encompass building renovation passports, the SRI levels, and also energy performance certificates. And as I said, EPBD will be opened next year. Didert, I will really close very fast. So just a few projects to showcase. Aldren, this is the afterlife of the European Voluntary Certification Scheme. It just closed a couple of months ago. Again, a lot of resources here to be explored. And these are 7 ongoing projects on energy performance certificates, and they are very relevant because all what they are exploring as evolution of energy performance certificates require building automation control systems that are functional to be brought to reality. And just to illustrate one of them, in which Riva is involved, UCERT, this is the elements that we foresee that the energy performance certificates should have. And as you see easily from here, building automation and control systems are a must if you want to go in this direction of building operational rating, so closer to contextual information and closer to guaranteeing that actual performance is delivered in reality. And a philosophical ending, looking at the future, we are entering in a dataism age. So we have a lot of data, we are building a lot of intelligent algorithms, but I would just say, let's be cautious. We are in this downhill conversation. Digital transformation is happening throughout society, not only in buildings. However, let's try to not transform ourselves into just a data point that will have an input in an algorithm, and still keep control for ourselves as humans. Thank you for your attention. If you would like to stay informed on all of these activities that I've captured in my presentation, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the Riva newsletter. And by the way, you would get a nice surprise, as you can see on the screen once you do that. Thank you.